Welcome to the Darshan Talks recording and podcast. If you like this video and podcast, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks Pharmacy. We're going to talk a little bit about the path that it takes to the new explorations that are available, and we're going to talk a little bit about reimbursement. And we have with us a pharmacist who has taken, shall we say, the road less traveled. We have with us Nick Kirkpatrick, and Nick has, like many of us, started out in a more traditional role and then expanded into what many would consider to be a very exciting, very different role. And I will say this for a lot of the pharmacists who are working in retail, some might say that he's working for the dark side, but then again, they would say the same thing about me, since I work in pharma. I work in pharma. He works with healthcare payers. So we both work on the dark side, just different dark sides. But the fact being, there are opportunities. I'd like to ask him a little bit more about what that looks like. But we'll go from there. So before we continue, Nick, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Nick Kirkpatrick. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you taking the time to do this interview today. My name is Nick Kirkpatrick, and I am a pharmacist, one of the co-founders of the Non-Traditional Pharmacists. And so this really resonates well with me as to looking at those non-traditional careers that pharmacists can go into. So I'm really excited to get talking today about whatever we want to discuss.
Perfect. So maybe we can start a little bit by discussing just what got you here. You have so many different opportunities. You were working in what many would consider as a pretty satisfying career, making six figures, but you decided to change. So talk to me about what brought you to pharmacy first.
Absolutely. So originally started off probably in early high school, looked at a lot of the different medical professions, looking into that space. We had some family friends that were working as pharmacists in the hospital environment. And that's my first exposure into the pharmacy career was hospital pharmacy. And so looking into that, I had gone to the University of Michigan for undergrad, had applied to pharmacy school through a pre-admit program out of high school and gotten in. And so that was something that I wanted to pursue at the time. Really thought hospital administration was going to be something that I was going to look into. As I got into pharmacy school, really looking through different opportunities there, I took that time to explore a lot of what pharmacy had to offer. And I was really only aware at that time of hospital pharmacy and traditional retail or community pharmacy. So I started off as an intern in the hospital, working in the inpatient setting and the outpatient setting.
Nick, before you get down there, I want to talk because I want to talk about your journey separately. I want to get a little bit into the actual desire. So you said you had some family friends, family members, if you will, and that's why you understood the hospital pharmacy, which is unusual because I know for me, my journey did not include an understanding that pharmacists work in hospitals. I saw the pharmacists who work in retail, and I knew about pharmacists working in industry, but you actually had a sense of what that looked like from a hospital perspective. Did that play a role in where you wanted to go, or was that mostly just information and you knew that's not a direction you want to pursue?
No, that actually definitely played a role in where I wanted to go. I thought the hospital was a very interesting environment at the time. To me, it seemed like a unique non-traditional type pathway for a pharmacist. I wasn't very well aware, like you said, of the retail side of it, where you see the pharmacists in the white coats behind the counter. I had seen that, but really didn't have much, to do with pharmacy before that. I hadn't really filled prescriptions before, didn't know a lot about it. But the hospital side seemed to be something a little bit more unique, where it was a more behind the scenes type of picture, where you get to work more directly with prescribers, with different nursing staff, with different hospital employees, making rounds with patients, working down in the pharmacy, in the IV room, checking IV bags, doing things that all seemed very new to me. And so that's where my first interest had come into play. And so ultimately, the more I spent time in the hospital as an intern, I thought more and more about the clinical side of it, but I've always been fascinated by the business side of different things as well. And so the administration side is what I had ultimately set out on going into pharmacy school. Was going to be hospital administration is what I was going to pursue.
So you were one of those people who knew where he was going, and then life had a way of sort of changing that for you. So talk to me a little bit about you knew you were going to go into hospital administration, which is a pretty big goal that a lot of people pursue. Where did you start? So you graduated from pharmacy school. Did you do any kind of like, I mean, we all had to do a couple of rotations and stuff. So which rotations did you do, if you remember? Which one stood out for you, and where did you ultimately start?
Yeah, so I had started off, after a couple of years of pharmacy school, had explored some more opportunities as well, and had, before I graduated, decided that hospital admin was not going to be for me. So it was something that, it was going into pharmacy school. I took a lot of time in the hospital, but ultimately I had found some other pathways, in the pharmaceutical industry, in the managed care realm that I had some exposure to, and really decided that might be more of an option that would fit more with my needs, my lifestyle, things, my ultimate career goals that I wanted to go down. And so I did have some rotations in hospital. I had surgery rotations. I had private psychiatric hospital rotations. I had pharmacy administration in the hospital. And then I had some through managed care settings where I was on the Medicare side. And so that was another piece that had worked in the commercial side through some internships as well, but the PBM space had always been something of interest to me. And so ultimately decided 2 more years of residency after school just really didn't fit into my life plans. And so it was something that I was going to pursue and kind of get started with a career right away out of school.
So that really raises a really important question for me, because I know a lot of pharmacists are pushed to do that 2-year residency. It used to be 1 year when I started. When I started, you didn't need a residency, but it was highly encouraged. And then somewhere along the line, it became 2 years. And now it's like 2 years and get BCPS. And you're just kind of going, when does this stop? And why do I need all of this? I mean, I can see it having tremendous value for a very specific population. For example, if you want to work in an ICU setting and you've got the experience behind you, yeah, maybe consider that. That makes a lot of sense. But for someone who's literally graduating pharmacy school, who doesn't know what else they want, I feel like that's a lot of pushing a little early in the game. But to each their own, I guess. So my question for you is, you now knew you'd gotten a taste for what you liked. So you did some surgical rotations. You didn't mention any retail, interestingly enough. Did you do any retail?
I did have some. Yep. So part of the hospital that I worked at had an outpatient setting there, so it was more of a smaller outpatient type retail pharmacy. And then I had some rotations through some more corporate type retail pharmacies as well. And that was something, again, that I did enjoy, the long-standing relationship with patients, where you could form instead of in the hospital, you'd have a patient come in, you'd treat them for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and they'd leave. I'm very relationship-based. I love to form relationships with people. And so that outpatient setting did hit a little bit closer to home for me. I could see the same patients coming in every month and get to know them, get to know their families, and establish those. So that's something I absolutely did get some experience with.
So what was your first job out of college?
My first job actually was in the retail space. So right out of, a little bit of a mixed bag of kind of all over the place, but right out of college, I had an opportunity to hop into a pharmacy manager role, a community pharmacy. And so that was something that the business side of pharmacy, the management side, I always wanted to develop those skill sets. So a lot of my electives during pharmacy school, instead of taking an ICU elective, I took business school classes. We had the opportunity to sign up for classes in there. And so while I didn't get a degree in anything in business, I was exposed to a lot of things with, personal finance, with sales management, with real estate investing, things of that nature, where I found those to be extremely interesting. And so right out of school, going to community pharmacy gave me that opportunity to work in a setting where I could develop that business acumen on top of the relationship with patients that I wanted. So got to manage a pharmacy, got to manage some people, some other pharmacists, some technicians, work on hiring, staffing, things like that, managing some of the P&L, the inventory, and things that I ultimately, that skill set was something that I thought was super important to have as a basis for my career.
So you did what many would consider sort of go up the retail food chain. You actually started pretty high up. Well, when I say pretty high up, you did manager. When I was starting out in pharmacy school, for me, post pharmacy school, I was first a temp, then I was first an intern, then I became a temp, then I got my own store. So you didn't do all of that. You sort of bypassed all of it and you started at the manager level, which is great. It speaks to people believing in you and trusting in you. But then something changed for you and you decided you wanted to explore something different. So talk to me a little bit about what changed. Where did you go next?
Yeah, and just kind of comment on the position of manager right off the bat. That had to do a lot with networking. So going through, I had a rotation at this particular pharmacy when I was a student, made a good impression on the staff there at that point in time, and then had kept in contact with those individuals. So I think that just goes to show a common theme that I'll probably hit on later is the networking and relationship building goes a long way into proving who you are, your personal brand, and getting opportunities that you may not otherwise get. But after some period of time, working in that space, I had the opportunity to work at high-performing stores to really understand what it meant to run a good pharmacy. And then I had the opportunities to work in some underperforming stores where there were opportunities and challenges. And so brought in to help turn those around and bring those up to a high-performing store. And good learning opportunity again, but I felt like I got to a point where when I really evaluated what I wanted out of my career and things, you're going to look at not just professional satisfaction. I know in school we get that a lot of the going to residency, professional satisfaction, looking at all the high achieving things. The question I like to ask myself is just because you can, does it mean that you should? And so with that, I really wanted to evaluate some more things that people don't talk about as often in school. It's a very academic setting, but what was important to me? Was it a title in my position? What were the working hours? Working every other weekend and throughout the evening sometimes when you have a personal life, that gets to be challenging. And so that's something that over time I didn't care for anymore. And I thought that maybe I could move into something else that would get me a new experience. What is your growth potential? I mean, working in a retail setting, there are an obvious path to growth of going up, like you said, from a staff pharmacist to a manager, to a district supervisor, to a regional supervisor. But what other avenues does that get you to, and where can you go from a salary potential or career growth potential? And so those are all things that I had started to take a look at and realized that I did want to expand out. I didn't have a residency under my belt, so I wanted to do something where I developed a new skill set. And so actually came across a position in a specialty home infusion pharmacy, which is where I moved to next.
Okay, so before we get into the home infusion, because that's a whole discussion, and I might have to have you come back and talk a little bit about that experience. I've worked in home infusion as well, which is a beast by itself, so it's fun to talk about. But let me talk about the concept you raised earlier, which is the importance of networking and personal branding. It's kind of fun to me because I remember, at least for me, this is in the early 2000s, when I was coming out as a pharmacist. There was no concept of personal branding. To me, that's it's become more important with the TikTok generation. It's become more important with the influencer generation. But until that point, it was really, you'll be known for your work. People will notice. But now it's become a real effort that you've got to put in. So could you talk a little bit about how you discovered what your personal brand should be? How do you cultivate that? And how do you tie all of that into the networking so that your network finds out more about your personal brand?
Absolutely. I think it's so critically important, and I think it's discussed here and there, but so really looking at that personal brand is who you are as a person. What is your character, your integrity? What are you going to do when no one's watching? I think it's very fair to say that you'll be judged for your work at all times, but that's also not going to be enough to get you exposure to drive a career and be in the driver's seat of where you want to go. So I think, looking at it, and this all started back in school for us as a couple of classmates of mine, we really started to take a liking to non-traditional career pathways. We started to look at, I had an opportunity to work at a large health plan in Michigan as an intern there. Started to see some space that, wow, there are pharmacists working, own their own businesses. They work in PBM, they work in pharma, things that we didn't get a lot of exposure to throughout school. And I couldn't find a lot of resources to figure out, what else could I do in there? And so besides the guest speaker that would come in occasionally, and so that's one of the things that we actually worked on doing, was working to create a resource, a website, the Non-Traditional Pharmacist, where we interviewed pharmacists in those roles to help give current pharmacy students and pharmacists that exposure so they could start to see, hey, maybe this is something I want to do, and they could learn about it sooner to see if they wanted to switch over there. And so that's one piece of, where we spent a lot of our time creating a brand in that space is really that non-traditional space. But it is, like you said, back to yourself, creating that personal brand of doing the right thing, being punctual, showing up to the job prepared, not having a lot of excuses every day in and day out of what to do, climbing up the chain of when you want to do a good job. Don't just do the job that you're assigned to, but do the jobs that need to be done. I think a lot of times when you have management or someone that you report into, it's important to understand their goals and how they're graded as well. And anything that you can do to really help drive that success for your direct supervisor is going to be a way that you can help build that brand. They're going to advocate for you because you can go out and help them be successful as well. So I think everything that you do from that standpoint, helps to build that personal brand, but then just being active in networking to reach out, to talk to other people is super critical.
So I just want to make sure this is your website, correct?
Yes, that's the right one.
Oh, good. I was like, I really hope I picked the right website. But okay, so you can go to the nontraditionalpharmacist.com and find out more about what Nick's up to and what he sort of was talking about. It is featured, as you can tell, in the Pharmacy Podcast, Pharmacy Times, and a few other places, University of Michigan and more. So that's kind of awesome as well. So let's talk a little bit about your experience there. So you talked about the personal brand being what people talk about you when you're not there, which is great. But my experience, especially as I learn more about what being an influencer is like, is you want to be remembered for one thing. What is that one thing you want to be remembered for? That's your brand. That's what people like right now. One of the things I struggle with personally is you can know me as a pharmacist. I've got 20 something years of experience as a pharmacist. You can know me as a lawyer. I've got 20 something plus years of experience as a lawyer. You can know me as a teacher. I've been teaching my entire life since I was 6, but for the most part, I'd say the last 20 years or so. My point being, there are all these different angles and aspects to myself that we can get into. But the truth is, no one can remember all those things about any one individual. That's just too much. You need to have one thing you focus on. How do you advise people to develop a personal brand so that when I say Nick, I think the non-traditional pharmacist?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is to be a problem solver, right? I think in any way, shape, or form is to be able to think critically and solve problems that are important to people, problems that they may know that they have or problems they may not know that they have. When it comes to my work environment in a professional setting, I think a lot of what I do is working with large clients and help them solve problems. Sometimes they know there's a problem there. Other times they're not aware of something. And so it's my job to help guide them to that. But with individuals, in the pharmacy space, if I can help somebody get exposed to a new job they didn't know was even existing or something to that effect where they're working, they're happy, but they all of a sudden could have been much happier or providing higher value to somebody else in a different career setting, I think that's a huge, huge perk of helping out and problem solving, because the more we can get people into roles that they love and they thrive in, the better off our healthcare system is going to be.
I love that. So you talked a little bit about personal branding, but then you've got to spread that message, which is through networking. Talk to me about the opportunities you had that you capitalized on in networking, because I'll tell you from my experience when I was a retail pharmacist, all I saw was clock in, clock out. You go in, you clock in, you're there for the 8, 12, 16-hour shift, and then you clock out. You spend the rest of the time with family doing things you actually cared about. So if anything, I'll almost saw my job as the penance I pay for the opportunity to spend time with my family. The networking suggests that there has to be something more. In my head, I'm kind of going, well, doesn't that mean that's less time with my family, doing less of the things I care about? How did you get past that mental hurdle of seeing networking like that?
Certainly, yeah. It's definitely a work-life balance is a big thing in today's day and age. I know we're all striving for that in a remote world that we're living in. But a couple of things I think, like you mentioned, on the job of retail, clocking in, clocking out, I tried to network in the sense of getting to know people up the chain at different stores. So asking for different projects. When we were acquiring a different pharmacy, that was something that I asked, raised my hand and said, hey, can I get involved with that? Can I help out with that project? Not something I've done before, but I'd love to learn more about it. If my district supervisor had a project that they were working on that had, some involvement or needed participation, I would raise my hand and step up and take that on. Even though it was busy at the store, I knew it was going to be an opportunity for me to establish my name within the company and then get that branding going out and really learn something new. I think a lot of that is going to be the key that you look for, especially if you're looking to change and transition careers, is what else have you done? I think people expect you to do the job that's assigned to you, but a big part of it is going to be what else have you done that shows that you're less of a risk when you change industries. So we can talk more about that later, but from a networking perspective, I think it really goes to, I'm a very social person. We love to go out, talk to new people, and I thrive in that kind of environment. I know not everyone is like that, and it can be a little bit more difficult. But I think there's a lot of ways to approach that, with live events being a little bit less prevalent than they had been in the past. I think LinkedIn is a perfect way to really get out there and network in ways that make it very simple and don't cut into your time that often. I mean, you can really get through and build out a very strong profile. I think that's something that's important too, is if you're going to build a profile, build it out, build it well, put a picture in there, have your detailed information, make sure it looks professional, because there's nothing worse than walking into someone's site and seeing a half built out profile that looks like they didn't really care about it. So having that first place as your personal brand on the online space is huge. And then working to reach out to people. People are always very willing to connect with you and talk for a few minutes about their career, especially those in non-traditional pathways. Someone taking an interest in what they have done is a perfect opportunity then for them to share more. They're proud of it, and they would love to share more about what they've done with others. So I think that's something that I found over time, that I've sent a lot of cold emails, a lot of cold calls out to people that said, hey, I'm interested in what they're doing. I'd love to get there in 3 to 5 years. What advice do you have for me? And most of the time, people will respond back and give me either something written. They might pick up the phone and call me. We might do a Zoom call. Really not being afraid to reach out. And worst case scenario, they don't respond to you, right? Nothing lost there at that point in time. But I think, coming out with an interest in what they're doing and making sure you frame it in such a way that you're not there to take their time, you're not there to mooch off of them, but you took a genuine interest in their career pathway, you found it interesting, and you want to learn more and see if there's anything you can do to provide value to that person. And I think if you frame your outbound messages and communications that way, you're bound to get a lot more responses.
Yeah. I'm starting to see us running out of time, so I want to make sure we get to the parts that we want to talk about. So you obviously started off in retail. We talked a little bit about that. You did some home infusion. What were your next couple of gigs that took you towards where you are today?
Certainly. So yeah, I did the home infusion for a little while, and then I actually had an opportunity pop up through the managed care space again. So there's actually a couple of offers from a health plan at the same time as a PBM, and started to look at the two different opportunities that were at hand, and ultimately decided the fully remote position that I have right now was the route that I wanted to go. So we were originally from Michigan area and live out in the Denver area now. So that remote opportunity is something that I really wish to pursue. But where I stand right now is I work with large self-insured employer groups and help them to design and manage their pharmacy benefit on an ongoing basis. So it's something a little more unique in that space. The background and details that I had in the pharmacy space, the community pharmacy space and the specialty space are critically important, because a lot of the changes that we make to a large group, their members have that impact at the pharmacy level. And so understanding how the pharmacy operates, what those changes might mean to their members, familiarity with the specialty drugs, that kind of thing, really gave me a good step to be able to advise these clients well on how to design and manage their pharmacy benefit.
So let's explore those words a lot, because I mean, it sounds very complicated. Design and manage a pharmacy benefit. What does that actually mean? Like, is it for employers to do that? Are employers even knowledgeable about that's something that they need to do? And how do they go about developing this?
Sure. So you kind of have to look at it as two separate pieces. So there's the fully insured clients that they pay an insurer to take on the risk, right? So they pay them a premium per member every single month, and that insurer group takes on the risk of managing that population. The groups that I work with are self-insured, meaning they take on the risk. And so they pay us an administrative fee to help design and manage it. But ultimately, they're in control of what drugs to cover, what not to cover, to an extent. We still have to have the clinical appropriateness and guidelines. We have P&T committees that review things. We want to make sure that we're providing a comprehensive benefit to members. But they have a lot more flexibility to design and manage their benefit in ways that somebody who's fully insured may not. And so that's where we come into play is, there may be clients that are very clinically savvy. They have physicians and pharmacists that are on staff, and they are there to help put input in. We have other clients who have no clinical whatsoever, and so they lean on us a lot to really work with them to figure out what it is. And so there's a lot of discovery there and a lot of relationship building where you really have to understand who your clients are, because a lot of times, you're not working with a pharmacist, you're not working with a physician, you're not working with anyone clinical. It's somebody who's on the business side, on the benefit side. And so you have to be able to take your clinical knowledge and relay that to someone who's not a clinician. So a lot of that is going to be building the relationship with that client, understanding who they are, what their goals are, what they wish to accomplish, what kind of benefit they want to run, and then how can you work to achieve their goals for them.
I love that, because it's, to me, the idea that's really interesting is I can think about how different geographies are going to start affecting this. So I'm thinking about if you are, say, in San Francisco, just for argument's sake, you're going to want to make sure, theoretically, that a lot of your employees have LGBTQ coverage, and you might want to have things like trans health coverage, if you will. On the other hand, if you're in the Bible Belt, you may want to make sure that you don't cover birth control, whether or not, I'm not getting into the politics of it, I'm just sort of saying, as an employer, that may be positions you take. And if you go with a with a PBM or with a health insurer, with a managed care company that does all that for you, you kind of buy into whatever they have. Instead, you get to customize it a lot more. And Nick, you're one of those people who helps them customize that.
Correct.
Okay. And what are the size of companies when that starts becoming something they should do? Like, I can't imagine the neighborhood baker trying to develop this. This is too expensive. This is too big, and the risk is too high. So how do you sort of, what's the size?
Yeah, so the sizes can vary quite a bit. Some of the clients I work with range in size from about 1,000 lives in their plan up to 350,000 lives. So it's a very wide variety of clients that fit into this space. But I think it's a really good point you mentioned is that the smaller that you are, the higher the risk is that there might be a high-cost claimant that's going to throw a big loop, a wrench in your budget for the year. And so we have seen that with certain clients where you may have a very rare disease state come about. You may have hemophilia, hereditary angioedema, a lot of new orphan diseases that are coming out in treatments. You'll see gene therapy starting to come out now too, where because they're taking on that risk, they may see a very, very high cost claimant coming into that small. And so spreading out that risk over 1,000 employees versus 300,000 employees is a very different situation for that. So there are things to kind of look at with via stop loss insurance or some sort of way to help manage that risk and predict a budget over time. Other avenues that I don't really advise on. I'm not a licensed insurance broker, so I don't go down that route, but that's things that people may look at. But yeah, we have a wide variety of clients, some in the healthcare space, some in the manufacturing space, some in the retail space. And every one of them has different goals and objectives for how they want to manage their plan. And at the end of the day, they all want to provide that comprehensive care and coverage for their employees. But there's things to think about, with people who may have a high turnover industry where their employees turn over quite often. And so they don't have that long-term return on certain programs versus those clients that, have very rich benefits. That's part of the recruiting tool, is having a super rich benefit. And so we really need to understand what the client's goals are, what their situation is, so we can properly advise on how to design their benefit. And then part of that too, is just managing, after we design it initially, it's an ongoing process, right? We're looking at a lot of spend month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year, and we're looking at where did that money go? Where are there opportunities for improvement? Do we see things like low-hanging fruit that are, certain drugs that maybe we can exclude because it's a combination of two generic medications that are already out. It's rebranded to something new, and so now it costs you $5,000 for the script instead of $20 for the script. So we're looking for things like that. Maybe you have a high diabetes population, so there's a way to better manage a chronic condition, or you have a high HIV population, and so there's a way to better manage that population to make sure that there's access to improved health. There's a lot of things that we can do that way, but it's a constantly evolving process, time over time, and we're on top of the new trends as we go on, because there's new things coming out all the time. I think one of the big things right now is weight loss medication. So but we're constantly up to speed with the specialty high cost products, but a lot of the chronic disease states are ones that are top of mind as well.
So that's really interesting. So you land up having these conversations with non-clinicians to help them devise their plans. If I was a non-clinician, I can see two big areas, and I'm sure there are 100 more that I can't think of right now that you deal with on a near hourly basis. But the two I would think would be the people who are all about finance, going, what does this translate into dollars and cents? My first question would be, one of the jokes they make about lawyers is that we went to law school because we don't understand how to count. So it's one of those things. I'm going, if someone comes to you and goes, what is the impact of this financially? Are you allowed to comment on that, or is that the insurance part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that we're projecting all the time. The way that we make decisions is really a clinical first approach. So we have a lot of independent people that don't work for the company, that are clinicians and experts in their field, that sit through a very transparent P&T process so they can evaluate the clinical nature of the drug first to make sure it's efficacious, that it's going to be doing what it says it is, there's not clinical concerns. Only after that point in time, if it's deemed that it may be an optional inclusion or something to that effect, do we have the ability to exclude it. But if it's a drug that's an essential drug, essential class, things like that, we're really not going to be we want to make sure the patients take care of first and foremost. So that's always the top priority, is that the clinical nature is sound, that we have a very sound benefit that way. But we can certainly comment as much as we can on the clinical aspect of the drugs, looking at, these are going to be high cost products compared to lower cost products that have similar efficacy or are actually similar ingredients, but have been around for a lot longer. I think you'll see new formulations of things like metformin, where there's different osmotic releases, different ones where some of them are very, very inexpensive, and other ones cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a script that effectively and clinically does about the same thing. So trying to best manage that, I think, is key. And really in this role, I know you mentioned the kind of the finance versus the other side of it. That's a unique space that I get to sit in as a pharmacist, because you are correct. The finance means a lot. And in order to keep a business solvent, they have to manage their benefit well. They have to do a good job not having wasteful spend. Where I can come into play is as a pharmacist who's worked in the retail setting, who's been in the hospital setting, who's been on the specialty side of things. I can help advise those people as to what that member experience is going to look like based on changes they want to make. So if they are going to make a change that's going to save some money on paper, but I think it's going to be highly disruptive, I bring that up and say, here's what the member would go through. Here's what that looks like at the pharmacy. You're going to get a phone call about the benefits. There's a lot of things that happen downstream that you may not be aware of because of just my experience working in the pharmacy level. So it's kind of a unique position to be in, where you're still speaking the finance language, you're still on the business side of it, but you still have to be very clinical, understand that space so that you know what the member goes through. Because at the end of the day, working at a population level like this, you can't forget that at the end of every single transaction is a patient who needs that healthcare, who needs their medication, who needs to have that benefit in some way, shape, or form. And so it's easy to step back and refer to things by life count and look at a larger number, and it's very impactful, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that there's a patient at the other end of every single transaction we do.
We're well past time, but we're going to do a quick SWOT analysis of what your experience is like working this. So what are the strengths of the job? What is it that you like the most about doing this job?
So the biggest things that I say I like are the population level work. So I impact a lot of patients at a given time. So decisions that we make can impact a wide variety of patients. I love that part of it. I love the flexibility of the job, right? So it's typically a Monday through Friday. I'm a fully remote position. I work from home 100% of the time. We do a little bit of travel to clients on site, but with the pandemic, that has slowed down, a decent amount. And the growth potential within. I've had the opportunity to grow quite a bit within this current role, but also, having this background has opened up a lot of doors for potential for next career stepping stones. So there's things a lot internal within the company. There's the formulary strategy side of things. There's industry relations. There are opportunities to work on product management on the sales side of things, or to transition over to a pharma at some point in time, one of those companies, and say, hey, I understand how the payer works. Let's work on getting access to your drug into, XYZ payer system. And so those are probably the biggest strengths that I see, is the absolute population level, the remote work, and then the flexibility and job growth potential.
So I'm gonna count the job growth potential and the opportunities which would have come later on. So I was doing a SWOT analysis. The opportunities will be the fact that you can go into these other roles that whether it's pharma or just going up the food chain itself, which is kind of interesting. So which takes us to the not so pleasant parts of this. So what are the weaknesses of the role as it exists for you?
Yeah, so while the remote nature is positive in a lot of ways, it's also a negative, because you're at home, you're behind the camera all the time, and you lose some of that human touch. So there may be days where I, come back in from a weekend and on Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, and I haven't left my apartment since, it's Thursday afternoon now, and I've been, behind the computer, haven't gone out, I don't see people. So that's probably one of the biggest negatives that I would see. It's a little bit seasonal, so certain areas of times of the year are very, very busy. So you may be working in a time where you're not working a traditional 8-hour day, but you're working 10, 12, 14-hour days. So that's probably one of the drawbacks, is the seasonality of it, and the remote nature of not seeing people in person as often.
Okay, so and then we talked about the opportunities being you can go into more spaces and grow that way. But what are the threats? What are the reasons you worry for your job?
I think there's a lot of news and things happening, shifts in the PBM world right now. I think there's a lot of legislation, regulation, things caught in a negative spotlight. I think I'm pretty proud to say that, where we work at, we have a very, very transparent segment, and a lot of the issues that we see or hear about in the news are not issues in the segment that I work in. But I think that's one of the biggest things, is that we see a lot of local state legislation, things happening where there is good intent behind them to help provide more transparency and more access to patients for more choice. And so it's a very difficult landscape to navigate with, state by state things, because we have a lot of national employers who work across state lines. But what we don't see a lot of times is some of the unintended consequences of some of those changes, where, it seems like on the surface it may be good for a pharmacy, or it may be good for a patient, but there are some back end things that happen that I won't get into today, but that could be, one of those missed pieces of the financial puzzle that are always not as front and center.
Perfect. And just before we go, thank you again for doing this. This was amazing. It was such a great conversation. We're, again, well past time, almost double where I'd like to normally keep these, but thank you. How can people reach you if they have questions?
Yeah, anywhere. So my LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. I can link to that or give you a link afterwards, but that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. I'll have my email in there as well. But feel free to send me a message, connect that way, or if you're on our website and have some questions, feel free to reach out that way too.
And the website again is?
thenontraditionalpharmacist.com.
There you go. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming on. And Nick, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me.